let's get into the main education piece. So main content and the main topic that we're covering today, how to escape commoditization and scale your firm with cash flow advisory services. So this topic really came about through a recent controllership masterclass that we did. During that whole live session, we actually did a bunch of polls, and we asked the group what some of their top pain points were. One of the biggest ones amongst the group was actually difficulties in scale. More than 70% of the group, and I think the group was around 25, 30-ish, more than 70% answered that that was a key problem for them. It was, I think, top 1 or top 2 problems for the whole group. So that was actually a lot higher than we expected. And so we thought it would be a really good conversation piece, discussion point for today's cash flow live session. So let's kick things off by talking about what scaling is at a high level. Scale is an interesting word. It's thrown around pretty loosely today. If you read any news on tech startups or you follow any of those trends, there's always mention of scaling and then some crazy graph with a straight up vertical sales trajectory. And that's usually what people think of when they think of scale these days. We as professionals, if we had access to unlimited capital and a desire to expand that much, we could show the same sales growth, but I'm a firm believer that that's not what any of us want. So, the real question we should be asking is, what does scale look like for an actual bookkeeping or accounting business? I always like to look up traditional definitions when kind of talking about these topics. So if you actually look up scaling in the dictionary, you're going to get a whole host of definitions around lizard skin and actual weight scales. But there was one definition that I found that really stuck out that I think is worth sharing, and that is scale is something that's graduated, especially when used as a measure or a rule, such as an indication of the relationship between distances on a map and actual distances. And so it's a little bit of a wordy definition, but there's 2 words that really stuck out to me, and those were graduated and relationship. And the reason that these stuck out to me is because I think they're really key terms when we're talking about scaling bookkeeping and accounting businesses. When I talk to professionals, and we talk to a lot, bookkeepers or accountants or business consultants in the accounting field, most of them are feeling pretty tired, pretty stressed, pretty burnt out. Probably, especially right now, here in Canada, it's personal tax filing deadline is on Saturday. So people are really in the thick of it right now. The US, I know, just they're on the back end of theirs. They just finished, I believe, mid-month. And so I'm sure everybody that is on this live session right now can relate to that. So really, all the professionals that we talk to are constantly working against the clock. They're fighting deadlines. They're trying to deal with multiple client requests at a given point in time. And, there's the never ending tax season, especially the last 2 to 3 years. It's just with every change during COVID, it's just deadlines, extensions, all of that stuff. It's just never ending. And so when I think about what professionals want when they talk about scale, I think it's really code for, we want structure, simplicity, and just relief from the pressure. You don't want to be so overwhelmed or so busy. And that's where I think that the terms graduated and relationship really become key terms, because scale is, by that definition, simply a measure between 2 things. There's a relationship between 2 things. And then scale is also graduated. So we're also talking about growth that can be massive, that vertical upward trend. Keep in mind, it doesn't have to be. It can be just incremental. So if we professionals want to scale, meaning structure, simplicity, relief, getting rid of that overburden, we really have to figure out the relationship between that end goal and what is actually required to get us there. We need to really think about that. So that's where the relationship piece comes in. We also need to realize that not everybody needs vertical hockey stick growth. We can actually have that progression to where we are and where we want to get to, and it can be gradual. That is the other key term that I picked out. Everybody thinks that success at scale has to be immediate. It has to be right now. And the reality is it could be that, or it could be 10 years. It really matters in terms of what you want to do. So the point there is that scale and progression can be incremental. It can be gradual. So let's dig into the first point a bit in terms of relationship and starting point versus ending point. So we know where we want to go, but how do we actually get us there? I'm a big E-Myth believer. I'm sure there's probably a couple other people that have read the books out there. There's many of them. There's E-Myth Accountant, E-Myth E-Commerce. There's a whole bunch. E-Myth is a book written many years ago, probably decades now, by a person called Michael Gerber. And basically the premise of this book and the whole series of books is it speaks about the entrepreneurial myth. That's the E-Myth. And that's simply the belief that most people believe that businesses are started by people with tangible business skills. They're started by entrepreneurs. When in actual fact, most actual businesses are started by technicians and people with like really good skill sets. So that means that most businesses are centered around a single person, the person with the technical skill sets. And that person is, their input and their expertise is required in order to run all facets of the business. And so that's essentially the E-Myth, is that because you have a bunch of technicians starting up their own businesses, essentially a sole proprietor, maybe slightly larger, essentially what happens is you end up with a whole host of businesses that are unscalable. These businesses can never grow because they're always limited to the skills and the capacity of that one single person or maybe two people. And so with that in mind, the first step, in my opinion, to getting to the blissful concept of scale that we're talking about is simple awareness. You need to sit back and actually ask yourself, are you a business owner or are you actually an employee within your business? And now keep in mind, you have to be really honest with yourself on this question. You know, I've done it myself through my progression. And it's really easy to say that you're a business owner. You know, you have your own office, you have your own letterhead, you have your own logo, but that's not actually what we're asking here. You know, what we really want to know is, if you had an employee, could you give your workload to that person and have them do it for you with few or hopefully no questions? And keep in mind that there are a lot of smart people out in the world, and we have no regard for cost in this situation. We're just simply asking, is your practice, is your business set up so that someone else could come into the picture and take over your work with very little lift, very little effort, very little training? And to be fair, there's a range here. You know, there's likely a number of tasks that someone could do, but then others that they couldn't. But the whole point here is that if you're asking yourself this question, and if the majority of the time when you look at everything that you do, if the majority of the time the answer is, I need to do that, then books like the E-Myth and people like Michael Gerber would say that you're actually an employee. You're just an employee within your own business. And to be truly free and truly scalable, which is what we're talking about here, you need this awareness because it helps you completely detach yourself from the business, even if you're the only person in it. And doing this one simple step will really make you think differently about what you're doing and how you're doing it, which will then start changing how your business performs and how it works. And once you have this awareness, you can take a step back and ask, what creates true scale for yourself or for your business, which, you know, we've described as a lot less of a rat race and a lot more freedom, whatever that might be for you. So to be a true self-sustaining business, one that could operate without you at all, if you wanted, you would need marketing to attract leads. You would need some sort of sales to turn those leads into actual customers. You would actually then need operations to satisfy those needs. And then you need some kind of customer service or customer support process to feed back into that cycle to keep people happy. And you would also need to have each of those functions defined enough that someone else could do them, which means they need to be well thought through, well tested, as in they actually work, they're not just concepts, and documented. Simply because if you're trying to get somebody else to do the work, they need some kind of framework or structure to do it. And so the small interjection that I made there about, you know, making sure processes work, it's pretty important because you need to make sure all of your processes work both in terms of logistics as well as some form of profitability. Because if they're not, they'll never be scalable. You know, if you have a really great service line, but it's not profitable, it's obviously never going to be scalable. You'll just be growing something that's going to continually putting you backwards. And so there's no concept of scale there. So that really gets us to how do we actually progress? Most of you are probably sitting there and laughing in your heads. Thanks, Kelvin. I don't have the time to think about all of these processes and, marketing, sales, and customer service, this, that, the other. But I think that's where it's really important to remember that second term that we talked about when we were defining scale, and that term is gradual. The old adage, Rome wasn't built in a day, and building your accounting or bookkeeping business doesn't have to be either. And to be honest, in my opinion, in the large majority of businesses, instantaneous success isn't possible and probably actually isn't even a good idea, just because of the growth pains that can come with that and the stress that it causes. So, you also have to have a little introspection there as well in terms of what you actually want. So what I believe is a good next step, once you have that awareness, once you realize what scale is and the progression of it, really what you should be doing is sitting back and building out a 3 to a 5 year plan where your end goal is scale, in our case, structure, simplicity, relief from that general day-to-day, a semblance of true work-life balance, which is hard to achieve. And that 3-year plan should consider each of the areas we described: marketing function, sales function, operations, what you're doing right now, as well as the customer service behind it. And you'd want to think about how you're going to build them out so that these processes wouldn't be reliant on you. Again, keep in mind that our goal is to build things so that you could be replaced, but that doesn't actually necessarily mean that you have to. It just means that you want to approach your business like that, so that you're actually treating it like a business instead of a sole, like an employee, a job. You're just continually doing work for everybody ad hoc. And then what you want to do is you want to take that 3-year plan and break it down into 1 to 2 year goals. You basically want to chart out, here's my end goal of, our definition of scale, and how do we think we're going to progress there over the next 1 to 2 years? What jobs do we need to do at a very high level to get there? And so that helps you break out the near-term goals down to 1 year. And what you then want to do is break the 1 year out into 3-month and 6-month goals. And in greater detail. So what jobs do you need to do in order to progress yourself from now towards your 1 year goal, which then gets you to your 3 year goal? And it's actually quite interesting once you go through this process. It's really liberating in a sense once you kind of have that roadmap that you've thought about, and it's could be an hour exercise, maybe it's a week-long exercise, but whatever it is, it's really useful for you to do because it gives you that roadmap for how you're going to get from where you are now to where you want to be. And if you're doing this consistently, if you're following it up, revising it, reviewing it every 3 months, updating those 3 to 6 month goals, you're continually progressing towards that 3 to 5 year target. That progression is going to seem a lot more achievable. Again, it's gradual. It doesn't have to feel so overwhelming or hard if you've got it laid out and if you're progressing towards it over time in a way that's manageable for you. Now, there's obviously a lot that can go into these strategic plans. So we can't really get into too much detail in them today. That would probably be a couple of cash flow live sessions just on themselves. But there are some key questions that you should be asking yourself when you're creating a 3 to a 5 year plan. You should really be asking yourself, what kind of work do you actually want to do? Because most people, when they open up a business, they just simply start and they start accepting clients. So part of why you're feeling stressed out and burned out is because you're probably doing work that you don't actually like to do. An example would be maybe you're a tax accountant and you're doing bookkeeping work and you hate that. Or maybe you're a bookkeeper and you love that, but you actually hate doing sales taxes. You really want to think about the things that you want to do and ways that you could potentially outsource the work that you have to do, but you don't want to do. It's a really great question to ask in terms of framing out where you want to go and how you want to achieve that vision of success that we're talking about. You also want to think about who you actually want to work for. Similar to the work that you are doing versus what you want to do. You likely have clients that you love working for, and you also probably have the exact opposite. You probably have those problem clients that you absolutely hate. And you really want to think about the difference between those two groups. What is it that you like so much about your favorite clients? And what's the difference between that and those that are obviously the opposite of that? And this will help frame up who you want to work with in the future. And once you know what you want to do and who you want to do it for, it's a lot easier to think about the jobs that need to be done in order to satisfy the needs of those people. How does it need to be carried out? And again, can you detail those jobs to be done to the point where someone else could simply walk in and do it for you? Obviously with some component of training, but could they come in easily and do this work for you? At least to the point where there's minimal interaction so that you're not the roadblock of everything. And if you've gone through and you've thought about all of these questions and you've detailed them as part of this strategic roadmap that you're building, you should have a really strong handle on your ideal clients, what they love about you and the services that you provide, and what you need to do to provide those services properly. And that will help you with the value proposition for your marketing and messaging. It'll help you with the value proposition, which also goes into your sales process and your conversion of leads to actual customers. It'll also help you standardize your operations and narrowing your work and your focus on what is really valuable for the people that you want to work for. Because again, a key issue here that we're talking about is commoditization. And part of that commoditization, again, is simply doing too much work, like way too broad in scope overall across all of your clients. And you're just doing too many very different things, which leads to essentially just trying to put out fires continually. Whereas if you had a very structured and focused process and customer base, it just makes life a little bit easier. Everything's the same. Maybe not everything, but a lot of stuff is the same. The core of your work is the same, and the approach becomes a lot more efficient and standardized. And of course, all of that talks to our favorite topic, which is pricing. If you know your key value prop, you know your ideal clients, you know what you want to do, you know the value that you bring, it becomes a lot easier to have those pricing discussions, because we see a lot of fear on the back end in terms of how should I price? The client might not accept that. The client might not see value in it. If you've actually gone through, mapped out what you want your life to look like over the next 3 to 5 years, you've talked in your head or put down on paper who your ideal clients are, how you'll work with them, and how you can provide that benefit, you've mapped out that value. You've really shown to yourself what that value proposition is for the clients you want to pursue, which then makes those pricing discussions really easy. Because remember, those clients that love you, value is probably not a conversation you have with them. It's probably usually the people that you don't like working with. So if you're focused on that client group that you love to work for and you can provide a ton of value to, the pricing will come with it. You still have to work on it, don't get me wrong, but going through this process just makes it easier. And so ultimately, if you thought about all of this that we've talked about, and it's a lot, I get it, we're basically, that framework's guiding you down a path of creating a standard approach, messaging, set of services, all centered around a client group or multiple client groups, but focused. And if you're doing the same thing in a profitable, highly repeatable way for a group of people that you like working for, we have just achieved our aim of scale. We again want stability, we want peace of mind, we want relief from the burden and the overwhelm of the day-to-day. And that process that we just talked about, that gets you there. So then it's just a question of actually carrying it out and progressing through it, the gradual piece. So the topic, we've talked quite a bit about scaling and how you can start to do it, what it looks like, how you can progress through it. But we also said that this cash flow live session was actually going to touch on, commoditization and cash flow advisory. The commoditization piece, again, is that scale, just doing too much work for too many people, too much different work for too many different people, and not really being focused enough and doing a really great job for your core group of clients. So that's the commoditization piece. But how does that actually tie into cash flow advisory? Well, cash flow advisory to me is obviously a super interesting space. That's why we do what we do. And there's 2 key pitfalls that we see that professionals continually run into. And first, they do the jobs ad hoc. So in doing that, they try to offer advisory in the cheapest possible way and the easiest way for them, which is usually spreadsheets. So Excel, Google Sheets. And second, for cash flow advisory specifically, professionals tend to underestimate the amount of communication that's required in the advisory service. So we talk about this a lot, when it comes to what is a cash flow conversation. Once you start a cash flow conversation with a client, it typically leads to more questions, which typically leads to more forecasts and more iterations and a lot more ideas. And it's extremely iterative and cyclical. And that usually leads to a lot more work. And so that communication piece is really key. And you also have to remember that that interaction is what the client truly values. So of course, with those two kind of pain points, or the two issues that we typically see, those actually go 100% against everything that we were talking about at the beginning of this session in terms of being able to scale. So, to be point blank, our clients don't really care how we build cash flow forecasts or manage their cash flow. Their end benefit, what they really care about, is that you're actually doing it. You're guiding them through their financial future. You're helping them manage their workloads. You're helping give them or get them free time. So how you spend time building and maintaining spreadsheets, it literally adds zero value to their client. But unfortunately, something needs to be done or used in order to actually create a forecast, or else you can't actually do the service delivery. So ultimately, the point here is that we're spending hours upon hours working in tools like Excel and Google Sheets, spreadsheets, and it might not actually be the most efficient way. So spreadsheets also lead to highly unrepeatable processes. Again, we're trying to talk about scale and how we can get to a point of, relief and getting away from overburden. And so when you look at spreadsheets, they require a lot of manual manipulation. They contain a lot of custom formulas, and they're usually custom and tailored to each specific client. The old adage, everybody's different. And while that's somewhat true, we do need, again, to remember part of that strategic plan, knowing our client base and our ideal clients. Those clients are going to have a lot of similarities. And if we want to scale, we need processes that are easily repeatable across these clients and by different people within our business. Even again, if you're hiring employees, they need to be able to pick it up and run with it quite quickly. So using spreadsheets and highly customizing them goes counter to our discussions around scale. So if you really sit back and think about it, because we spend so much time in undervalued to the point of the client doesn't care about it, how we create the forecast, and we spend so much time there and in time-consuming processes, typically that leads to the stress and overburden that we see professionals get in. They simply can't. They're working so hard on building and maintaining the forecasts that they can't actually allocate enough time to what matters to the actual client, the actual conversation and the decision-making process. And so that makes it extremely difficult to scale what should be a highly valuable service offering, something that the client really needs and wants. Every professional we've ever talked to always says, I've got at least 2 to 3 to 5 clients that could really use controllership, cash management, cash flow planning services. So the demand's there. It's just hard to execute if you're not putting your effort into the value added piece, and if you're just simply wasting too much time on essentially what is scope creep, doing too many customized forecasts for too many different people. So cash flow advisory is 100% scalable. You just have to plan it out, the service offering out in advance, just like how we discussed at the beginning of the session. You need to think about what kind of cash flow services you want to offer. You need to think about who you're going to offer these services to, and you need to actually think about how these services are physically going to be carried out. And here you're going to need to consider the frequency of the service offering. So you could do it weekly, monthly, quarterly, even annually. You need to think about the technology that you're going to use to carry out the actual forecast. And you need to think about how you're going to communicate with your client around these services, as well as not just how you're going to communicate, but the amount you will be communicating with your client around these services. Again, that's a very often overlooked portion of this service offering. And if you can answer all of these questions, much like any service offering within a professional firm, you're going to have a good framework around what your cash flow advisory services should look like. You're going to be able to describe the value of the service properly to your clients, and really make an impact on your marketing and your sales process, as well as your general messaging. If you sat back and you've actually thought about the process as a whole and mapped it out as we just described, it'll also lead you to think about the actual service delivery as a whole. It'll help cast some light on why spreadsheets can actually work against us in creating profitable, scalable cash flow advisory services. Because again, if you put your client hat on and you think about what they value the most, it's that interaction and the advice and the guidance that they value the most. So the quicker you can get them there, and the more that you can talk to them about it, and the quicker you can iterate and collaborate with them, the better. So now there was a lot in that about 20, 25 minutes that we just kind of walked through, and there's likely a whole lot of topics that could come off of that discussion, but we are trying to be cognizant of people's time here, so we don't want to get into too many avenues. So we're actually going to keep it a little bit short, on the short end of the scale today. But we will open it up to Q&A at this point in time, and we'll say that that's the end of the main learning session and go to the community here. So I guess my first question would be does anybody have any questions about what I was chatting about quite quickly? Nope. That's either good or bad. So I'll put it out there. How many people are doing cash flow advisory of any sort? And who do we got here? Thank you, Selena. Yep. If people want to unmute or just put in commentary. AJ, are you doing cash flow advisory of any sort right now? Budgeting, forecasting, cash flow planning?
Actually, I'm not doing cash flow per se. Oops. I'm not doing cash flow per se, but I am having discussions with my clients, just sort of off the cuff. They're stating where they're at, and I'm using my involvement in the bookkeeping to verify their gut impressions about their business, and that's helping them, or it's giving them feedback that they need to think about something else. And that's about as far as I go with it.
Yeah. So do you have any interest, I guess, in progressing it further than that?
I
or is
do.
That kind of where you would, yeah.
But I'm scared of it because I'm not sure that my classroom training has given me sufficient knowledge to make those comments, other than what I've acquired through just plain old bookkeeping activities.
Yeah. Yeah, I find that we hear that comment a lot, to be quite honest. We've talked about it in a few different cash flow live sessions where there is fear. Like, thank you for being open on that point. I think firstly, it's good to acknowledge that there are a lot of people that feel that way, that they might not have the credentials to it. And the thing that I always like to remind people, especially bookkeepers, I feel like bookkeepers have the propensity to undervalue their knowledge. I was actually just recently having a conversation with one of my team members this last week, and the conversation essentially amounted to how can we get your experience level up more quickly, because the technical background isn't necessarily as important for the services that we're offering. So I think the one comment that I would like to make to you, and other people can feel free to chime in, is you probably have a lot of experience in terms of bookkeeping. You probably have a lot of really good ideas about how people could improve cash flow in terms of processes, systems, technology that they could use to do it. A very quick one off the top of my head is most people's cash flow issues are due to how they invoice. And, that has nothing to do with having technical background in terms of what a textbook will teach you. I haven't run into a accounting textbook that will actually teach you Johnny and Johnny's company should actually be invoicing quicker in order to collect cash faster. That's more business sense and experience. And so I'm guessing, and I'm just throwing it out there, I'm guessing that you probably have a lot more experience there than you're maybe giving yourself credit for. So I think, the comment that I would like to make is don't be worried about your your technical background, because if you do need to be comfortable in what you're doing, but also don't undervalue your experience in what you've done, because that is something that we see a lot and we talk about a lot, is valuing your experience, and that experience is highly valuable to your clients. Again, going back to that receivables collection process, you probably have insights in terms of how that person could be sending their invoices out more quickly or efficiently. There's probably an app, if they're, say, a service industry where they're doing furnaces, maybe they could use a tool like Jobber and just simply bill literally on site, or Square, and they just collect credit cards right on site. And then they don't have cash flow issues in terms of waiting for people to pay. Typically, we find when we talk to most professionals, we always like to challenge people with, are there 5 things that you could think of for every client that would help them improve their operations? And the answer 9 times out of 10 is yes. And my response to that is, now think about the impact. If your client actually followed through with those, think about the impact on that person's business cash flow wise. And 9 times out of 10, those responses do have some kind of economic impact. They do help the business in some way, shape, or form. So that was my very long-winded way of saying, don't undervalue your experience or what you know, because there's probably a lot more in your head than you think, and that information is extremely valuable to your client. It's just a question of talking to them about it and presenting it to them and going through that process.
I would also add in, I just wanted to add in there too, like it's also about the relationship that you have with your clients too. Like if you have a good relationship with people, you can have those conversations, but that is a big part of it too. You have to build relationships, because even to like Frank's point about if people are interested in it or not, they might not be open to what you have to say if you don't have a trust built up between them.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. So Frank, what does it look like on your side when people are interested about getting more information? Like, what are they asking for? And
well, there are some that are looking actually for more detailed forecasts and budgeting to help them out and see how their business is actually doing. I did get a chance actually to try your product a little bit, but I just got busy with my obligations, and then I had to stop it. And I'm planning on getting back to it as soon as we are done with the tax season. So I wanted part of the things that I wanted to also know is your product, what is it catered to? Is it more for established businesses that have historical figures, or is it can also be used for, let's say, startups where they would require some forecasting? Like, I know they are a bit different from my experience also, because that you don't have any historical figures, especially for startups, that you can build on.
Yeah, 100%. Our tool was built. I'll just mute you there a bit, sorry, so we don't get feedback. So our tool was built to actually, not to get too much into a sales pitch here, but our tool was actually built to solve the pain points that I was talking about with spreadsheets. When we started doing advising, controllership, fractional CFO work for businesses, we spent so much time building out customized spreadsheets, really detailing them out, which is great. But, you really need to unpack service lines and what people are asking for. So if somebody needs an investment deck to go talk to investors and show a 3-way financial model, balance sheet, income statement, cash flow forecast, they need drivers, they need inputs. That kind of work is definitely more prone to spreadsheets. Our tool is really built for the short term, like from day 0 to 12 months from now. And how are people going to navigate, the next 3 to 6 months within that year? And I say that because people's 3 to 6 month targets change all the time. People have to make pivots. Maybe a big expense comes in that they weren't expecting. Maybe they didn't get funding. Maybe a GST return comes in late. Maybe a client didn't pay them. There's all these different things that could happen where people need to navigate how they're going to get to the next 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. And that's really what our tool was built for. And getting rid of all the complications of spreadsheets in that. So having to upload and manage all of the data. So now all of that is to say that we really focused on the conversation and iteration with clients. That was a core focus of our application, because that's where we do see most of the value. And so it's very easy to create forecasts for people with no historical financial information. So even though we leverage APIs and pull in data and analyze it for you and save all the effort in terms of building a forecast out, like we just simply do that for you. If a company has no history, we've also made the tool to be very easy and simple to use so that you can build out the forecast for someone. Because of course, even though someone has no historical information, like a spreadsheet won't help you either. It's in terms of what's in your head, what's in the client's head, how are you conversing about that, and how are you taking that information and putting it into a product like Helm so that you can map it out and show their framework for you, or show their framework to them. And so essentially, in being simple and easy to use, it makes it very easy to use for, say, a startup that has no historical information, but you know what their life should look like. You can quickly model that out in Helm as well. The key piece there being, it depends on if you want to do that short-term piece or if you want more of a long-term forecast. If you want a strategic 3 to 5 year three-way model, I'll be upfront. That is not Helm's wheelhouse. Ours is more around. That's why we like to talk about controllership. We are much more about managing cash, planning cash quickly, easily, and navigating people's course through the next 0 to 12 months. Hopefully that answered your question. So, I'd also be curious. I don't think we've ever asked Chris a question. I think you're actually a new person. I might pick on you a bit. Sorry, Chris. Have you ever done cash flow forecasting services, or have you actually planned the service offering out from start to finish in terms of what it looks like and how you're going to deliver it? It's the risk in asking questions, is people might not answer.
Throwing people putting them on the spot.
I know, right? Calling people out.
Reminds me of class. Oh, right. I have to pay attention.
Yeah. Teacher, don't pick on me.
From my side, really, I have been looking at forecasting, offering this service for some time now, and to be honest with you, I did set up a separate corporation just to do that, and I want to concentrate more on it and try and push it to more people. I want to get, let's say, my staff or hire even more staff to handle the mundane bookkeeping tasks and concentrate on the forecast, because I do see lots of potential in it, that you can grow business and reach out to more established businesses that are, say, on the medium, from small to medium size, and have them to provide them with this added services rather than just they might have accountant, bookkeepers on staff, but then they'll be able to get them to do these advisory services to them.
Yeah, 100%. So it sounds like you've put a little thought into it. Have you actually taken it that whole course where you thought about, these are the people I want to pursue? Like you talked about even just a medium-sized business. Do you have a particular niche or an industry segment you would like to pursue, just out of curiosity?
Not at this time. I haven't really concentrated on a certain, but from discussions with my current client base, some of them are interested in that, trying to get it, and they are on the smaller scale businesses. I see more potential also heading or gearing towards more medium-sized businesses. I don't really have any particular sector in mind at this point. I don't know if that's going to come up later on to decide on it. But definitely there are, let's say it's going to be businesses who are, let's say, in retail and also in commerce, let's say, whether they are in e-commerce, whether in manufacturing, these kinds of customers or clients that might need my services to see how they are doing. And it's same thing with the startups who are established, they are past the startup stage, who are growing now. They would need the service too, whether they are in IT or any other field that they have gotten themselves into.
Yep. Yeah, that all makes sense. It's, you brought up an interesting point, and I should stop referring to past events because we keep talking about a lot of the same stuff in a lot of events. I always like to say that everybody needs cash flow forecasting services. I do find in my experience that the very, very small businesses maybe aren't the best fit for it, simply because their bookkeeping might not be in such a great place and their focus is on just simply starting out as opposed to truly getting going. But, when I say that, that's a pretty small threshold. If you look, I always like to look at the major business cycles where you've got growth phase, maturity phase, and decline phase. And every business within each one of those cycles needs something related to cash flow, advisory, or management. So, on the growth phase, all of those businesses will be contending with trying to manage the inflows with really extreme outflows. And in most businesses, there is always a delay on money going out the door for employees and cost of goods and inventory and then there's a delay on the inflow. So on the growth cycle, it's extremely important, as well as on the decline, because you're trying to help people manage the decline. And obviously there's less money coming in versus your cost is high and you're trying to manage, resize, this, that, the other. But one of my favorite spots to play is actually on the stability side. So a place where most people would say that cash flow management really isn't needed at all because people have their buffer and they've got, war chests and the list goes on and on. That's actually my favorite spot to play because companies can run the risk of having too much money on hand. Like there is actually a component of too much of a good thing. If you look at the perspective of a customer, a client, and you think of it from their standpoint, they started a business to better themselves personally. And so if they're holding too much cash in their business and not paying themselves enough, or not paying their loans off, or whatever that looks like, they are actually not returning a very good ROI relative to what they could be. And so when you look at a lot of these cash cow businesses, the propensity is to hoard cash, and the propensity is to pay down corporate debt in advance of personal debt. And if you look at things from a holistic high level, that goes counter to most entrepreneurs' personal aim, which is bettering themselves. And the only reason I say that is because that's been my experience. The entrepreneurs typically strap themselves personally to make their company be in a good spot. And you don't need to do that when you're in the stable phase. Like when you're in a stable phase, you have certainty around cash inflow and cash outflow, and you really should be trying to optimize that outflow so that you're maximizing the person's personal ROI. And if they can accelerate, say, their personal mortgage payments, or they can, earn more income every month because the company has that capacity, that's hugely high value information. Just having the thought perspective around that, I find is very much different than what traditional accounting or traditional bookkeeping would speak to, and that really resonates with clients. It is 10:02, so I do think we will leave it at that. So just in terms of closing, thank you everybody for attending. I hope people found value out of the discussion today. There was a lot of content in a very short period of time. So if you had any questions about anything we talked about, especially because a lot of it was more conceptual than maybe technical, but I do think it's actually a really good conversation piece to talk about, because there are a lot of people out there essentially experiencing burnout, and they do want scale, they want to become uncommoditized. So really wrapping your head around scale, growth, strategic planning for your own business is actually really important, in my opinion. Again, if you want to view any of our past live content, we've got them up on our website as well as YouTube channel. So please, again, invite people that you think will get benefit out of this. The more people we have on these calls, the better. And just as a reminder for some of the announcements we had at the beginning, just to refresh your memory on those, we do have Outsourced Controller Bootcamp on May 4th with Mark Wickersham and Kelly Parks and Peter Stewart from Veeam, virtual education event around how to essentially provide outsourced controllership services. We also have 2 master classes on May 12th. So if you're interested in any of those topics, please just let us know and we can send you the links for that. And I do see that Selena corrected my bad math, which is our next cash flow live event is actually May 11th. It's every Wednesday, not May 10th. So please excuse me. I did my notes on Tuesday, so bad math there. But thank you everybody again for attending. I hope you really got something out of today's event. And thanks for attending. And hopefully we'll see you May 11th, not May 10th. Thank you.